Welcome to Maine, we're stretched to the bone. Prices keep rising, the paycheck stays prone. Inflation keeps knocking, won't leave us alone. They're selling the lie, groceries climbing, the gas tank is low. The bill's hitting harder than snow, but silence still blankets the truth. Where does it go? They're selling the lie. Housing is gridlocked from Portland to the county. Workers commute far past what feels soundly. Talk of solution comes yearly, not loudly. They're selling the lie. They're selling the lie. Say every voice counts, but watch who gets lifted. Some stories vanish, some get the spotlight shifted. Depends on what trends and what keeps them gifted. They're selling the lie. I won't believe them, I wanna believe, but truth's always stuck in between. Static and spin, drown the signal again. Nothing is what it seems. I wanna believe you, but every headline turns daylight into redesigned skies. Facts get twisted, context missing. We choke on the simplified alibis. Wanna believe you, but all I see is shadows where the answer should shine. The fact is fiction, conviction.
Welcome to the Muddy Waters Podcast, where Mainers tell their stories.
Good afternoon, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you are watching the Muddy Waters Podcast. The Muddy Waters Podcast exists in large part to help the people of Maine better understand what's going on in our state by talking about things and talking about them in a way that the mainstream media doesn't want to talk about, because sadly the mainstream media has become a propaganda arm of the Democrat Party. Fortunately, we have wonderful outlets such as Steve Robinson and the Maine Wire, and other, we'll call them freedom fighters, trying to get information out there. Unquirer on X, and then Maine X Community on Facebook, and there are some other good people out there that are doing some things. But this is why we're here, because we want people to be better informed about what is going on in our state. And so that's why I'm here. Chuck Ellis, I'm your host. And today we have with us Amy Sussman and Destiny Johnson, who are connected to either were there or are directly connected to somebody who was at the Lewiston shooting, and have been the two most prominent voices, I think, if I'm not mistaken, outside of I think Steve Robinson. Probably he's got a news outlet, but you guys have been the prominent voices carrying forward the conversation, trying to uncover what exactly happened and trying to inform the people of what happened with the Lewiston shooting fund. Is that a safe assessment?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you guys both for coming. What I'd like to start with is just to kind of have people to kind of like give people a sense of who you are and how you're connected to this issue before we get into exactly like what happened and then where we are today. So Amy, I don't know if you mind kind of starting and telling your story on how this became an issue that you have become one of the champions for.
Sure. Thanks for doing this also. And thanks, Destiny, for doing this too. My nephew was one of the 18 killed at the shooting. His name was Max Hathaway, and he was a married 35-year-old father of two, and his wife was 7.5 months pregnant. And so after the shooting, she had the baby, and a joyous and difficult day, truly, but beautiful children. He, on that day, had just received his college diploma from University of Southern Maine. And actually they went to Schmenge's as a family to celebrate. His oldest child wasn't with them. And maybe a half hour, I'm not sure exactly how long before the shooting, his 19-month-old daughter got a little fussy. So his wife took her home, thankfully. And by the grace of God, I think, or we probably would have lost all of them. So for this issue, for the fundraising that was done, and fundraising, I always think is a generous term. It's really fun collecting. I started looking into it August of 2024 because someone handed me a publication put out by the Maine Community Foundation, and in there it talked about the fund, and how many people contributed, how much money was raised, and how many people received those funds, and then how many nonprofits received the funds, and that's where it started for me.
Yeah. Well, I obviously like long overdue, but my condolences. I can't imagine what it would be like to lose somebody, especially in such a tragic thing like that. Yeah, and it sounds like there are a lot of tragedies that went on during the situation, but yeah, thank you for being willing to speak out and share. Yeah, so Destiny, what about you? What's your story related to this?
So my name is Destiny, and thank you, Chuck, for having us, and Amy for speaking out on this. So my story is, I live in Wyndham. I was at Spengy's. I'm in a golf group with a bunch of girls, and we decided to go to Spengy's after we were done golfing in Auburn. So that's how I'm connected. I was at Spengy's that night. I didn't learn about any of the, the funds as far as the 1.9 being distributed to these nonprofits until I want to say shortly after Amy had mentioned it to Jennifer, when Jennifer had her second surgery, and she was faced with $100,000 medical bill that they weren't covering for her at that time. So, of course, we knew that this money was raised, but we had no idea that 1.9 was distributed until, what was it, last year or this time last year, roughly?
October 2024 is when I told Jennifer, around then.
Yeah.
October, November, yeah.
Yeah, so you were there. Obviously, you experienced that, and did you sustain any injuries? Is that I think I feel like I've heard that from some other interviews that you've done. Is that right?
I didn't sustain. I wasn't shot. My friend Jennifer was shot. That was sitting in front of me. I did mess up my knees quite a bit jumping off the high table chair.
Yeah. But yeah, you were not shot. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood that, because like I said, I thought I'd heard. So yeah, so you were there, you experienced it firsthand, and then obviously later on people found out about what happened with the funds. I believe in disclosure, and so one of the things that I want to let people know about related to myself is I serve as the chairman of the board for an organization called the Root Cellar, which I think is a phenomenal organization and does really good work, which is why I'm the chairman of the board there. That organization is one of the organizations that received funding. And you may have noticed, if people have been watching the news, that there was an organization that found a path, we'll say, to be able to give funds back to victims of the shooting that it gave the funds to victim first, but the same exact amount of money that the Root Cellar had received from Maine Community Foundation was distributed there in order to be able to help the victims. I'm not going to get into that. You can see information about it on the Root Cellar's website, and the executive director is really the PR man for our organization, and I'm not here to speak on behalf of that, but I just feel like full disclosure is necessary, especially in a situation like this. So that's kind of that's out there. And so one of the things, so I guess, like, take us through, obviously you found out, you said, I think it was in October of 2024. Is that what you said, that you found out about the Amy, that you started looking into?
So I was given a publication in July of 2024, and we had just had a July 4th party at our house, and we planted a tree in honor of Max. We just had his service in May. There was a lot going on that year. And by July, I thought, okay, we did the tree planting. It went, it's a beautiful tree. And I thought, okay. And then someone handed me this publication put out by the Maine Community Foundation that talks about 5,241 contributors to the fund, $6.6 million raised, 162 individual beneficiaries and 29 nonprofit beneficiaries. And I looked at that and thought, that can't be. I put it away for a month because and when something bugs you for a month, there's a reason. So I pulled it back out and started looking at it. I knew from my family that 100% of the Lewiston-Auburn Area Response Fund was going to the survivors and victims' families of the shooting. No question. And so I didn't understand what I was seeing. I called the Maine Community Foundation, talked to their marketing communication director at the time for like a half an hour or so. I had more questions, some he could or wouldn't answer. And so he told me he would elevate the issue, take it kind of up the chain, I guess, and I would hear from someone soon. I reached back out to him 3 days later because I learned that my niece tried to get counseling from one of the recipients of the fund, and they denied her counseling, one of the nonprofits. And so I felt that was pretty significant. So I reached back out to him by email to tell him that. And he said, again, you will be hearing back from someone soon. And I did not. I'm told now by the Maine Community Foundation that the chair of the steering committee emailed me on October 3rd, but I never saw that email. Maybe it went to spam. I don't know who that person is or didn't know then. I did reach out to the consultant that they used, and pretty enlightening conversation with him. I asked him, why did they include nonprofits? He said, I told them to. He felt that it was important that the community receive funds because, as he explained to me, my sister and my nephew's mom and my nephew's sisters would not benefit from the victim family portion of the fund. So these nonprofits would help them benefit. Meanwhile, my niece tried to get counseling from one and was denied. So I said to him, I'm looking at this list and I don't see what's going to benefit my sister here. I talked about the steering committee for the nonprofits, including 6 members who receive funds for their own nonprofits, and a 7th member of the steering committee got funds for a spouse's nonprofit. And his reply to me about that was that there are only a certain number of people who can do this kind of work, which I found offensive, actually. That I think if you're on a committee like that, that is a complete conflict of interest if your own nonprofit gets funds. That's self-dealing. There's no other way to look at that. I've since learned a lot more about that process. But that time, that's the conversation I had with him. I had a lot more questions. I did not agree with him about a lot of it. He talked about a shooting in Buffalo where it was at a grocery store and it left a food desert in that area. And so it was important for nonprofits that provide food to receive funds. And I don't have an argument with that, but that's not what happened here. This shooting didn't leave a food desert. So, and the fact that there were so many people, 162 individual recipients, beneficiaries from the fund, I don't really feel like there's room. No money would ever be enough, but certainly don't crowd it with 29 nonprofits. But that's what happened.
So here's a question. So what is the Maine Community Foundation saying happened, and what their process was, and what has happened in this, so we can kind of take what they've said and then kind of match that against what you found out, if that makes sense.
So they all along have said that there were 2 separate funds. And I believe that's what they were told to do if they were going to include nonprofits, create 2 separate funds. But I'm looking at their own publication here, and they do not list it as 2 separate funds. So in my mind, 2 separate funds means a website for one and a website for another. And if there was going to be a separate fund for nonprofits, perhaps don't do it at exactly the same time that you're raising money for survivors and victims' families. They claim, and they had 2 different bank accounts, and okay. I mean, I guess you'd have to define fund, and we can argue about that, but it's semantics to me. It really looks to me like they raised money on the backs of people who were at that shooting for nonprofits in the community. As I started getting a little noise about this, it became, instead of the Lewiston-Auburn Area Response Fund, which is what the name of the fund is, with 2 parts. And this, I could show you this, it's on their own publication. it became the Lewiston-Auburn Victims Fund and the Lewiston-Auburn Broad Area Recovery Fund. Like, so they tried to divide it that way, but there were never two separate websites. When people went on the website, they could choose victims, family survivors, or they could choose nonprofits, but the list of nonprofits was not there. So they wouldn't have known what those nonprofits would be doing, which ones were getting the funds, and what they would be doing with the funds. And it just doesn't follow best practices established by Victims First and the consultant's own nonprofit. They work off the same list of best practices, and using an umbrella term that way for two separate funds, if you want to say it, that's fine. But still, it was one umbrella term, and that becomes very confusing for people. It's confusing for donors, and it's more confusing for the survivors and victims' families, because they were told all along that 100% of this fund was going to them, 100% of the Lewiston-Auburn Area Response Fund. They were told it in a meeting. They were told it, we have two emails that came from one of the consultants, making sure that they understood 100% of the Lewiston-Auburn Area Response Fund was going to them. So by using that umbrella term, it made it confusing for everyone, and egregiously for the victims' families and survivors. It's very shocking to learn a year later that money that was promised to you didn't go to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the sad things about this. Obviously, the Lewiston shooting itself was a terrible tragedy, and personally to you, and to both of you in different ways. But on top of that, you have, and actually in response to that, you had this incredible outpouring of love for the victims, for the city of Lewiston, essentially. Lewiston Strong, all that kind of stuff. And like, it should have been an opportunity for us to look at this as being this incredible, like this great thing that instead has been tainted by what's kind of happened here. And like, to your point, from things that I've heard, there were many people in prominent positions, perhaps in our government, who were sending people the link and saying 100% of the proceeds goes to the victims. And then, but the link, from what you've described and from what I've heard, right, took you to a page where you could choose. But like, if you followed a link from somebody who's saying 100% of the funds go to the victims, then you go there and there's an opportunity for you to potentially make a mistake. People, by the way, I know this, I worked in banking for years. People do not pay attention to what they're doing. They pay as well as they should, right? And there's some personal responsibility there, sure. But ultimately, like, they followed something that said all of my funds are going to go to the victim, so I don't need to think that much, right? So here I am clicking, yeah, sure, okay, whatever. And I think what's interesting is I've not heard this necessarily before, but your understanding was that the money that was being set aside for the nonprofits was to cover these other things that were not directly the victims, but maybe family members or something along those lines. Is that right?
Well, according to the consultant, his answer for why, pardon?
That was his advice.
Yeah, his statement to me was, the reason you include nonprofits is because there's a larger family. So Max had a wife and children, but there's a larger family for him, sisters and a mom. And so the rest of the family would be able to benefit from the nonprofit part of the fund. And when people click on nonprofit, I think they expect it to provide direct support to the people from the shooting. And that was never actually a requirement. And the people who were giving when they went to the website didn't know what was required of those nonprofits. So, in best practices, you want complete transparency. You want honesty, complete transparency. And like you said, I went back to the way back. I looked way back on X, then Twitter, and there were many posts. 100% of this fund is going to survivors and victims' families, and they were reposted by the Maine Community Foundation without correction. Make sure you understand that there's a nonprofit part of this. And from my understanding from the Maine Community Foundation, 36 nonprofits applied for the funds. 6 were declined because they weren't in Lewiston or Auburn, and 1 was declined because it didn't finish the application. there was nothing on merit. There was no vetting of those nonprofits when they did provide those funds to them. So their statement of what they were required to do, I think it said that they could provide support for people experiencing trauma in the area. So no requirement to provide support, but could, and everyone experienced trauma. Everyone in Maine, I'm sure. So it was a pretty broad description, and that came out like 2 months ago. Response. It was an email that a reporter got from the NCF. So they're still coming out every now and then with a new fact sheet. And I think, it's 2.5 years later. How could there be new facts? It's frustrating.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's definitely frustrating is kind of an understatement. Transparency it seems to me to be the key to the best policy, right? Especially in something like this, and that I think that has been the most challenging thing from what I'm hearing from you, and from what I've heard from other people, is the lack of transparency there. So I'm learning stuff in this process, even today. So
yeah.
So
me too.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's crazy. So this is like 2 years ago that all of this happened. And like, what have you learned from, so you mentioned that you've spoken to people who work for the nonprofits that received funds, and like, what have you kind of gathered from those conversations?
So like when I called a bunch of them and asked what they did with the funds. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
And I did it. I started doing that in August of 2024. So it was not even a year after the shooting. And I don't know that anyone else had really done a lot of that. And I just cold called, the first one on the list was permanently closed.
Okay.
So that was a problem. They had received the $65,000 6 months prior to that. I went through the list, and I don't live in Lewiston, and so I don't know what a lot of these were. I remember going directly down to the YWCA because I grew up in a YMCA, and I had great hope that the YWCA had provided some help. I spoke with the executive director of the Y and asked what they did with the $65,000, and learned that she told me they put a wall up in their entrance and bought some cameras. And that was work they had wanted to do for a long time. And I found it incredibly disappointing because there were a lot of young families from these shootings, particularly at the bowling alley. That was a kids' night. So there's a lot of services a YWCA could provide to them, to that victim group. And they chose to use it to check off a box on their wish list. Very disappointing. Many I didn't get answers. Many didn't answer the phone at all. Some I left messages, didn't get called back. The United Way told me they didn't do anything to help the families and the victims' families and survivors, that they gave the money to other nonprofits. Some were already on the list. If I look at the list, I could say that there may be three, maybe four. Community Concepts and the nonprofit for the deaf community certainly were helpful. Community Concepts started the Resiliency Center. And I try always to point that out. It's hard when there's 29 and maybe you can pick 2 or 3 that helped. But I need to make that statement for sure, that they created the Resiliency Center, and a lot of people find that really helpful. But the rest, I couldn't tell you what they did. Even there's like 3 or 4 counseling nonprofits, and you would think, okay, for sure. When I called and asked, what did you do with the funds? Or this is what I asked, as a victim's family member, would I be able to get counseling at a reduced rate or free? And none of them said yes. And one said, I asked one, what did you do with the money? And the guy said, I think they're going to open up a new office. And I thought, I don't really, incredibly disappointing. And it leads me to the point where, when you look at nonprofits and how the Maine Community Foundation handled this, the broad the thought I have is that no, you can't trust them. And that's a terrible thing to do to every nonprofit. So looking at how this was handled, and, if it was a mistake, or, they didn't think it through well, or it's the first time doing it in real time, all that, okay, just make it right now. And they're not doing that. I don't understand it, but it hurts every nonprofit because it affects people's trust of them. And that's, I think, really, really unfortunate, because there are great nonprofits, like you said. And so I think that if nothing else, they would do that for the rest of the nonprofit community. I would hope that they would do that if they can't seem to find the reason to do it for the families and the survivors of the shooting.
So can you rephrase that again? Sorry, I missed. I don't know that I understood exactly what you were saying there.
That the motivation, I feel like a motivation for them to make this right, to either claw back the money from the nonprofits, or they're worth a lot of money, the Maine Community Foundation, that I feel like they could make this up. And not doing that hurts every nonprofit, because it affects everyone's trust of nonprofits. So if it doesn't motivate them to do what's good for the families and the survivors, maybe it would motivate them because they want nonprofits to do well. And they do. They give out, I think, 280 grants every year to nonprofits. But when people now, if you look on social media at any post about this, people are constantly saying, I'm not giving to nonprofits anymore. And that's not a good result of this. I'm sorry that it's come to that, but I thought for sure that once realizing this, they would think, it didn't go the way we thought. Like, for someone who was at the shooting and received $7,000, and Destiny could speak to that, like what people experienced, what they were doing. It wasn't like watching a car accident from across the street where there's no threat to you. Someone was in the building trying to kill every person in those buildings. And so people laid on the floor and pretended to be dead. People helped those who were shot. People ran into closets and offices and locked themselves in and barricaded themselves in and waited till the noise stopped. People heard other people being shot and killed and saw that. Children saw that. And for that, these people received $7,000 from that fund. Well, every single nonprofit, including the museum, Maine Mill, YWCA, United, $65,000 to each of them. And so the re-victimization of that group of people is just astounding, because if you think, how could I not be more important than a nonprofit? Not only am I not more important, I'm a 10th as important. And someone who was shot and survived, they gave the nonprofits twice as much as people who were shot and survived. Not everyone, but a few that I know of. It damages every nonprofit. And I think nonprofits are important.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think it's so interesting that our world has gotten so negative on all nonprofits in a lot of ways. Like, a lot of people have, not everybody, but there is an incredible amount of negativity being thrown at nonprofits, in part because, there are some nonprofits that are getting a lot of press that are like defrauding, the American government at a number of different levels. I think people have other problems in general with nonprofits, and largely it's like a response to the fact that they're getting frustrated with their own property taxes rising, where nonprofits don't pay property taxes and things like that. But I do think that nonprofits are not inherently evil. They're not inherently bad. They're good things, largely. The reason that we've structured our society in the way that they are nonprofits, they don't have to pay taxes, things like that, is because ultimately, historically, and many of them continue to operate this way, they are positive and good for our society. But sadly, that's not what's being seen right now. And I don't know if we've lost Destiny. I think she's got some issues. I would love to, if she's still at least on audio, because her video is not working. If she's there, feel free to speak up.
I'm still
at this point,
I'm
Destiny.
still here, but can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, but your video is not there, which is fine. But if you want to go ahead and kind of share kind of your experience, so Amy's been talking about the struggles of people being able to get get help and get funding and things along those lines. If you have anything to kind of share about your experience and or your friend's experience from having been there seeking support, and what that looked like and what happened.
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
Yeah, I'm not good at asking questions all the time, but basically just want to like, as Amy's kind of been talking about like the problems that people faced as they were trying to get support, both from the Maine Community Foundation and then depending on the situation, if they were told that they, to reach out to some of the nonprofits, like what the experience was like and just what your experience was with that.
Yeah, so for me, like, of course, in the beginning, for like the first couple of days, I didn't leave the house, but the only thing I knew of is to go to the armory. We went there. My friends, the ones that were at the Smengies, they wanted me to go there. But of course, we went there. That's the only pretty much help that we received in the beginning, other than going to the resiliency center. So, I went to a few meetings where I live out in Wyndham. It was harder for me to get up to the Lewiston area after that. So in the beginning, for just being in that building and going through, I didn't feel comfortable even going to the resiliency center in the beginning. It took a lot for me to even leave the house to go there, but I feel like they're the only nonprofit out of all of them that really helped some of us survivors. Any other help I have, I don't know of. I wish that there was more like therapy, I guess. The EMDR is not really, I didn't think it helped me that much. I felt like going into Smengies helped me more. Just from things that I thought I saw, I had to like go and confirm to make sure that, in my mind, to get over it, I had to go back in there. I know not every survivor went back in, but that's what helped me. And after the shooting is going back in. But as
what
far as
what was it? You mentioned the EMDR. I just want to make sure I understand. What is the EMDR?
So it's, I don't know the exact term for it. Maybe Amy can help me with
It's
that.
eye movement desensitization. I don't know if the R is. It's a trauma treatment, and they use eye movement to kind of reframe a traumatic event for you, I believe.
Right.
Okay, and that was one of the things that was offered by one of the nonprofits. Is that what you're saying?
It was
Or
offered,
somebody else?
It was offered through like the therapist over at the Maine Resiliency Center.
Okay.
And of course, I got a bill, and I still don't know if it's gotten paid or not through that. So.
Yeah.
But I mean that EMDR, I'm sure it helps some people, but it didn't help me. Like I felt like, because she was just trying to tell me to go back, like think about where I was and to go back in and vision it, and I'm just like, I can't do that. I have to. When we had the opportunity to go back into Smengies and they told us that we could, I was like, all right, I need to confirm, because in my mind I thought he shot up in the air. But his gun was just jammed and it looked like he was shooting up in the air. So I had to confirm that he didn't.
I think
If that makes sense.
Sorry, Dusty. I think it's interesting what you just said, Destiny, is that didn't work for me. And so my thought all along, and Victims First is supports this. This happened to the people in the rooms, and everyone reacts differently, and their own way of healing is different. So just give them the funds to put their lives back together, and quit trying to guess what's going to help them most. I don't have any way of knowing what's going to help Destiny compared to another person. So yes, there were nonprofits that provide counseling on here. They didn't do it at a reduced charge, but even if they did, so say all the money went to nonprofits that provide counseling, and they did use that money for that. What if that's not the type of counseling I need? or like Destiny, I don't live in the area. I think what we've learned from this is that the nonprofits weren't shot. Give the money to the people and let them put their lives back together. And if that includes counseling, good, do counseling now. Maybe it's counseling later. Maybe it's home modification. Maybe you need to pay your bills while you're off from work, whatever it is. I think the point would be that let people put their lives back together with the generous donations that were given.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah.
Dustin.
No, I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, oh, that makes sense. If you've got more to share, Destiny, I'd love to hear it. If you weren't finished.
No, I think I was done. I mean, like I said, I kind of thinking about it now. The resiliency center, it helped me, like I said, when I went, the times that I was able to go with my daughter and her softball and all the sports. It's kind of hard to get up there, so I kind of do miss going to the resiliency center, but at the same time, it's like the yoga and things like that, that's not going to help me. I don't find that helpful, I guess. I don't know, maybe it helps other survivors, but not me. And then they're talking about going to the bowling alley. I can't even get to that, so it's kind of hard, but
Yeah. So it's still, and it's still something that you carry with you, and you're working through today.
mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. And very little support.
I was gonna say I still have a hard time being in the dark, as far as like, if I'm out somewhere, I have to be home before it gets dark, because I can't get in and out of my truck in the dark by myself, if that makes sense. I tell everybody I'm scared of the dark, which is hopefully eventually I'll get over it, but that's something, I think it would be hard to get over.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 2.5 years later and I'm still trying to get over it.
Yeah. So, Amy, I want to move back to, because I think you've done so much research on this, and see if we can get to, all right. So a couple of things seem to have happened from what I'm hearing, right? So obviously the shooting happened, people were, and everybody was impacted the way that they were impacted. And then the Maine Community Foundation contacted a consultant and there was advice given to raise money for nonprofits and for individuals. And money was raised for nonprofits and individuals. And then for the nonprofits, there was, you've mentioned a steering committee. So what did you uncover about that process? And I think you've kind of highlighted some of this, but I want to maybe draw it out a little bit. So that there was a process where they determined what would happen to the funds, and I think you said it was 1.9 million, and there was 65,000 that were given to 29 nonprofits. What have you been able to uncover from talking to people on the steering committee about what the process was there?
I haven't spoken to anyone on the steering committee. I've only heard.
Okay.
That they met for an hour. That's the amount of time that they met. I think there wasn't much of a vetting process that they were given. So there wasn't any way to disqualify any of the nonprofits. So they just, if they showed up and completed their application, it sounds like, I can't say, but according to the Maine Community Foundation, the 29 that completed their applications and were in Lewiston and Auburn received the funds. It's really not best practice to have those 6 members of a steering committee get money for their own nonprofits, and then a 7th get money for a spouse's nonprofit. I don't really know where that's ever appropriate. Apparently the Attorney General signed off on that. I think public opinion would have a different opinion about it.
And how many members of family members of the victims or victims themselves were part of the steering committee?
None. So what's interesting, when they had the meeting for the survivors and victims' families, December 6th, I think it was, of 2023, about 6 weeks after the shooting, the consultant ran the meeting. And he had many of the members, I don't think all of them, of the steering committee for that part of the fund for the victims, families, and survivors on the stage with him, and said to the group of people from the shooting that you can't be on the steering committee for this fund, for this money for you, because that would be inappropriate. You can't be on a steering committee if you're going to be a recipient of the money. He literally, it's in their meeting. Meanwhile, at the same time, or soon after, the Maine Community Foundation chose this steering committee and then allowed them to steer money to their own nonprofits. None of it follows best practices at all. No, I can't say none of it. That doesn't.
Right.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah.
Like that. It hurts the mind to think about like how we're here. And when did you start becoming public about this and really trying to raise awareness of that? So, yeah.
So I learned it I got the thing in July of 2024. In August, I started calling. I talked to the consultant at the end of September. I started calling the governor's office to ask questions because I didn't even know who brought in the Maine Community Foundation. And I was asking that question and what were the parameters around this work. I couldn't get through to the governor's office. I did contact her office 14 times and spoke and emailed with a staffer after I was ignored the first 4 times. Anyway, then I thought it was never I never wanted to be calling someone like Destiny and saying, hey, look, that shooting, they raise money for nonprofits because that happened. I never wanted to have to tell anyone that because that's, I'm assuming, an extremely awful feeling to realize you were being dealt with truthfully, that they did this and didn't even tell you. It is re-victimizing to that group of people. And I never wanted that to happen. So I thought, well, let me get to media, let me spread, because people giving to the fund should know what happened to their money. It took me a while to find the list of nonprofits. People who gave to that part of the fund should know where their money went. And so the first media outlet I called, the reporter said, well, it's just you complaining, I said, well, it's not my opinion. It's what happened. And yeah, it is just me because I'm not a reporter. That's why I'm talking to one. They still haven't done an article about that. There was a reporter at News Center, Maine, Raya Wooten, who she did a good job for us. She did a good job for the community of people and for me. She's not in the state any longer, unfortunately, but I appreciate that she did 2 reports on it. I hadn't gotten to Steve Robinson. It took me a year of trying to get attention. I went to the city council of Lewiston, asking them to speak up for their constituents. Like, I'm trying to make noise about this. This, I think, shouldn't have happened this way. I didn't get anywhere there. And it wasn't until I reached out to Paul LePage. I kind of was like, I'm not sure what else to do. So I learned from him that the day after the shooting, he called Janet Mills and said, because he's from Lewiston, he was very upset and said, look, these people are going to need help. Let's you and I do this together. I'm the Republican, you're the Democrat. Let's raise funds together for the survivors and victims' families. And she said, no, I'm getting the Maine Community Foundation to do it, is what he told me a year after I had been asking the governor's office. And I almost cried on the phone. I thought, I've been asking that question for a year. And so he raised funds on his own. He said, all right, if you're going to get them, I'll raise funds on my own. He raised almost $474,000 and went to people who were shot and victims and the victims' families. And so I wanted to call him and basically thank him for doing that and then ask, hey, you got any advice here? Because I had even tried to meet with the chief operating officer at the MCF around about July of last year. June and July. It took us a couple months to arrange a meeting that we were both happy with. I wasn't willing to go to the MCF. I didn't think I want to walk in that building. And I wanted it just to be two people talking. I wanted to give her a perspective that maybe she hadn't heard, like from this side of the table. And then after emailing a bunch of times, I thought, I don't think it's going to be worth it. And I said something to a survivor. I don't think I'm going to do that meeting. And she said, no, do that meeting. I want to go with you. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that would be great. So I got back in touch with the COO and said, this survivor would like to come. Maybe she'll bring another person or two. We'll come to the MCF. You can have whoever you want in the room. It was back to where she wanted it in the beginning, really. And she declined the meeting. Canceled the meeting, and that was the end of that. When you look, there's a document out now that tells, it's a bit untrue about me, that I have been uncommunicative with them, which is not true. And it's a part of a document that the Attorney General's office has that was sent to the city of Lewiston. I mean, it gets really kind of pretty ugly, actually. I forgot the question you asked me in the beginning. That little rant.
Well, I think that's been great. I think just kind of understanding the process and how everything kind of happened for you and how you got to this place where you become the spokesperson. But and started reaching out to the media, because I think for the most part the mainstream media is not done a great job. The real herald that's been carrying this forward from a media standpoint, I think, is the Maine Wire, which for some reason gets accused of being a white nationalist organization, which I think is hilarious.
I'm sorry, when I reached out to Paul LePage, that's how I got to the Maine Wire. That was the end of that story.
That's how.
And
yeah,
Paul LePage. That changed everything.
Yeah. Well, because they're interested in reporting on the news, right? I think they're interested in reporting on things that might potentially make the Janet Mills look bad, right? Whereas the rest of the media seems to make money off of Janet Mills, so they seem to be a little less interested in reporting on things that might make her look bad. It's funny. I like to make fun of News Center Maine, because sometimes they've done some good things. I appreciate that. They've been probably one of the better of the mainstream media, in my opinion. But I would watch them put out these news stories, right, about a bunch of restaurants are closing in Portland, and it's but no speculation as to why they're closing. Aren't you the news? Isn't this kind of your job to be what is it that caused these businesses to close? Is it bad policy by the governor and the Democrats that are hindering businesses, making it difficult for them to continue to exist? I would chide them on social media and say, you're halfway there. Now you need to tell us why they're closing, right? You're at least reporting on some of the information that could, if people want to cross. It's interesting when the mainstream media is telling a story that they're really trying to focus on something from a leftist perspective, right? They'll kind of give not the facts but their interpretation of the facts, instead, and kind of trying to guide people to where they want them to go and what they want them to believe. But in this case, when they're reporting on some of these other things, they're we're not going to do any guiding here, because if we do any guiding, it's going to make Democrats look bad, right? And it's absolutely ridiculous. And unfortunately, that's just the world in which we live. And but here we are, and we'll live in this world. So the one that actually is here. So but I just want to thank you again, both of you, for being willing to speak up and do this difficult stuff, because going against the Czar of Maine, and not that was your intention, but she's chosen to be the person that you have to go against, because she's a big part of why the information is not coming out. As you said, Paul LePage is the one that shared the truth about the fact that it was her decision to use the Maine Community Foundation, which my understanding is, I'm not an expert in this, but I was talking to somebody from the nonprofit world, in the nonprofit political world, we'll say. And basically the Maine Community Foundation is a catch-all for, you want to give to an organization, they're one of the best ways to give to it, for if you're giving for whatever, there's tax reasons, and they end up being a go-between. And they're really kind of the only organization that does what they do in the state, is my understanding. And so they kind of have a monopoly on that element, if that makes sense. And that's probably why they were chosen to go through, not necessarily because they're specifically a liberal organization that is friends with Janet Mills, which that also may be true. but anyway, it's a really interesting. But what seems like, I think, the most distressing is like, hey, I mean, at this point, we know a lot of information. Why can't they just come out and like clear the air?
Yeah.
Like at this point, admit that you made a mistake and fix it. Write it.
Right. Right.
Like I don't understand why you don't do that.
I
You know?
I can't for the life of me. And even they'll say we followed the advice of a national expert. Well, okay. If it was a point where we're not telling these people what we're doing, maybe you ought to rethink that. And it never worked for my mother when I was a kid. Well, I did what I followed that guy, I'm responsible for my own decisions. So they'll constantly say we followed the advice, but I don't think that they actually did. I think they made some mistakes in this. And there's nothing wrong with saying, look, I made a mistake. We made a mistake. They have the ability to make it right. They definitely have the ability to make it right. And it would be interesting to Chuck to look at how much money they are managing and where does that money go?
Yeah. How
Is it
much
all
do you
that
know? Do you know that the answer to that question?
I just Googled it, $811 million.
And how much did they give to nonprofits?
They give out, I don't know how much they give to nonprofits. They give out 280 grants.
Related specifically at what I was getting at is related specifically to the Lewiston shooting. How much did they give out?
65,000 to each
per nonprofit for a total of 1.9 million. So they have 811 million. We understand, that they have access to, and so an assumption could be made that they could, if they chose to. What do you think? Like, what do you think is like holding them back from doing that? Like, what's the motivation? That's the stuff that's like difficult because, like, I think it's anyway to completely understand. It's like why would they not like try to do something? Because like in the court of public opinion, it seems like there is a division along political lines here, right? If you're conservative, you tend to be on the side of the Maine Community Foundation made a mistake and they need to fix it. Or you're blaming the nonprofits or something themselves for having received the funds and the fact that they didn't have services specifically available specifically to the victims. You could come from that perspective, but I think most people are aiming their targets more, I would think, at the Maine Community Foundation or specifically the immigrant focused nonprofits.
By the way, I don't. I mean, that is true. There were 9 or 10 of them that went to immigrants, but there are also 2 that were run by a guy who committed manslaughter and served 19 years in prison for killing someone with a gun. And one of the nonprofits that he's involved in is a prison advocacy nonprofit, and the other is a theater group for ex-cons. Like that together, those 2 nonprofits receive more funds than my nephew's widow. So, yeah. I mean, I don't come out with, I'm not anti-immigrant, and that I think we get thrown in that, which is unfortunate. And to be honest, and Destiny can attest to this, that shooter didn't ask anyone what their politics were. So I can only get Republicans. I can only talk to I can't get a Democrat to talk to me, including the representative for Lewiston, will not talk to me. And my question to them is, do you care? Will you talk to a victim's family member? And 4 times I've called. And that's been in the past month. I don't understand it. I really don't. And that is so troubling to me. This should not ever be a political issue. No. This should be joining us together, because how could you not want to help these people? I don't understand it.
I'm pretty sure the victims themselves were probably not all Republicans, for instance. And, that's not like, it's absurd. But yeah, it shouldn't be political, but it largely is. And basically, if you're on the side more often than not, if you're on the side of the Democrats, specifically if you're the politicians, but I think in general, if you're on the side of the Democrats, you think that the only reason that anybody's raising an alarm bells about this is because of racism, and that's absolutely ridiculous. But it is appropriate, I think, to highlight. I think I'm glad that you've included some other things that, like, there are a bunch of organizations. And I think one of the questions that I would want to ask is what the organizations knew or what they were told. And you've said this before. Sometimes you kind of speed through some stuff, so I might want to highlight it. What were the nonprofits told that they were supposed to do with these funds, right? Like,
There was
because I think
there was
and
a
what were they
list.
told that the funds were raised for, right? Like, because I think that's helpful to understand as well.
I can't know exactly what they were told. It was the
Right.
Broad Area Recovery Organizations Fund. Um, I don't know exactly what they were told. I have the protocol, but I don't have it right here in front of me.
That's right.
There was no requirement to help the families from the shooting or the people who survived it. I do know that, and so
Okay.
you almost can't fault the nonprofits. Well, you got money from shooting. It's hard. And I
Yeah.
feel for them because I don't think nonprofits knew how much money they were going to get either. They didn't know it would be 10 times more than someone who was there or twice as much as someone who was shot. No nonprofit knew that. Um, I can't know exactly what they were told, but all of them received the funds if they were in Auburn or Lewiston, and if they just completed the application.
Yeah, well, it's there's a lot that goes into this, right? And I think these are some questions worth probing. But like, if you're a nonprofit and you're told that you're going to have access to unrestricted funds, because most nonprofits, their funding is like comes for specific things. There are grants that are written. Here's what you have, and you can use it on this, and you're restricted on what you can use it on. And then you find out, hey, there's a grant that's being offered, and it's partly as a result of this situation, but people theoretically gave money to be able to help nonprofits. And you kind of have there's this thing that if you're a nonprofit, or on the board of a nonprofit, you have a fiduciary responsibility to do what's in the best interest of that organization. And so if there's funding that's available, such as like the PPP back in COVID, right? And you have access to it, like you actually kind of have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure you take advantage of that opportunity. So there are some things here that make this a little bit murkier, maybe muddy the waters a little bit. We'll just do a play on words for my podcast, but like make it a little bit more complicated for the nonprofits themselves. But I do think that there is a degree of responsibility of like asking those questions of like, well, very rarely has it happened that something like this has happened where people gave money, and it sounds like some of those people maybe thought they were giving money to the victims. Obviously, it's directly, and the funds went into this into another pool. Oh, go ahead. Do you want to?
Can I? So this is not unusual. This is not unusual, and it happens with every mass shooting, which is why we have these victim advocacy groups like Victims
Interesting.
So there's a list of shootings where this happens, and it's very, very difficult for Victims First to get in there and make sure that there's a dedicated fund for only the shooting victims. Nonprofits swoop in to grab those funds, and it happens every single time. And the problem is the legislation is only looking at donor intent. They're not looking at what are these nonprofits doing with the funds? Should they be required to assist the people from the shooting? So Victims First motto is 100% in, 100% out to the victims of the shooting and the family members of those who were killed only. So there's also, and other tragedies in Baltimore, the Baltimore Key Bridge collapsed because a ship ran into it. Thing fell right in, it's a huge thoroughfare around Baltimore. The Baltimore Community Foundation raised $16 million after that bridge collapse, and not one dime went to the 6 families of the people who were killed or the 2 people who were injured in that accident. When the Fire Aid concert happened, I don't remember, a year or more ago, because of the fires in California, $100 million was raised and not one dime went to a person who lost a home. So it isn't unusual, and that's the problem. And that's why when I got to the legislature, Representative Katrina Smith is trying to get emergency legislation, so that nonprofits are required to be upfront and accountable for what money they receive, what they do with it, that to tighten that up. And that legislative council meeting was canceled, so it won't be happen until next year, but hopefully it does. because not only do we need it in Maine, it actually needs to happen federally, so that when shootings and these things happen and people are victims of this, they don't become a victim of the fund being taken from them also. It happens all the time, and it should never happen. The last thing someone like Destiny or anybody else in that shooting should worry about is, am I going to actually receive the donations that are meant for me? They can't be thinking about that then.
Right.
You know, they can't be going to a meeting and asking really critical questions because they're just having a hard time being at the meeting. They're taking advantage of people in the worst moment of their lives. And why can't the Maine Community Foundation own up to that and make it right? That's all we're asking. It doesn't have to be all this negative press against them. Just make it right. I thought for sure that's all it would just, hey, did you realize this? And then they would make it right, because with that much money in this state of Maine, I think people are really upset about this, and they have every right to be. When you give money to a nonprofit, you should know that it's going to be used the way you expect it to be, and not go to these list of nonprofits that aren't helping. And I understand what you're saying about the nonprofits, that, yeah, they're always looking for funds and grants, but this was from a shooting. So while I give them a little leeway, it was also from a shooting.
Yeah, no, it's a valid criticism, I think. And I think, yeah, so, but yeah, I know it's challenging to understand why the Maine Community Foundation can't just, own up to it, admit that they made a mistake. And that they were not as transparent as they should have been, that there was not clarity about where the funding would go, and that they made a mistake, which I think, like, in large part, like, I know that there's a lot of negativity around nonprofits, but I even think, that the role that the Maine Community Foundation or organizations like them generally provide is generally a good thing. And so broadly, I think they do a lot of good things. And so I'm not in a position of wanting to be negative on them for just like anti-nonprofit. I think that's a silly response to this. And I think, but at the same time, I do think that they have a responsibility to do something here, to fix the problem, and make sure that victims are taken care of. And you mentioned a couple times victim first. And you mentioned that they're an organization where 100% of the proceeds go to victims. And yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything more about victim first, but
I've been speaking to, she's now their, I guess, assistant director, Anita and Zach, at Victims First, for a year and a half. Like, very early on, before I spoke with a consultant, I talked to Anita. She actually gave me his phone number. So, because I thought, I don't know what I'm getting into here. Let me find someone who knows what's happening. So the money that the root cellar redirected, I guess we could say it, because give back means it would go to the Maine Community Foundation, and that's not what happened. So it was given to the victim base through Victims First. That fund is a separate fund at Victims First for the Lewiston victims and survivors, for the families and for the survivors. So any bit of interest off of that fund goes back into that fund. Any administrative costs that Victims First incurs, they fundraise separately for that. So this is absolutely 100% in, 100% out. Some of the towing money, that there's one towing, I guess, one lot that's towing some cars, and that money is going to Victims First. There was a concert in March of 2024, and that money was going to be used for a memorial, and that hasn't been started. So that band actually is in the process of getting that money back at $7,000. That will go to Victims First, and that money is being applied for and given to the victim base right now. Like, every day I'm sending people there, and Anita's working with people, and it's not just helping them with funds. She's been helping people look for jobs, and can we help you find a car? It's incredible what happens. That group is made up of people sort of like me, who lost a person in a shooting or were victims of a shooting themselves and survived, and did not like what's happening with these nonprofits. And we have got to stop this. Their lives were out of control at that moment that shooter came in the door. And what happens afterwards should try and put their lives together, not victimize them more. And that's what Victims First is committed to doing. I get that the Maine Community Foundation, if this was a mistake on their part, okay, own up to it and make it right. But the continued defense of it, and to the extent that they're not even telling the truth about me in documents, they've shared information about a victim's family member, a phone number, and an email address in a document they didn't redact. That's unconscionable. To go to those lengths when you could just make it right. If you truly care about this community, if you're a community foundation, care about the community from the shooting and do what's best for them. There's never going to be enough money to put their lives completely together, but the money that amount of money that was donated, it should have gone to them.
Yeah. Cover medical bills and other things, counseling and things like that.
It's not even that now. It's not medical bills anymore. Like Ben.
Right. That's in the past now.
It's about living. Like I can't do the job I used to be able to do. Some people are disabled. People have a lot of fear, can't leave the house. It runs the gamut. And it's not just the people who were shot. It's not just the family members who lost a person, though it is them. It is also the entire group of people who were there. I can't imagine the trauma that they've experienced. And it's something they'll have to work with their whole lives.
Yeah, and there's, for people who haven't seen it already, you can search and find, probably Unquire or Maine X Community has some of the theatrics, we'll call it. Theatrics aren't bad. Theatrics can be good, but the things that have happened at the Lewiston city council meetings where people have tried to bring this up, I think that's something that if you're interested in learning more, that's one of the places I would recommend going to find more content related to like what other victims who showed up. I remember one guy in particular was very upset that one of the city councilors would not look at him while he was talking about what had happened to him and his experience through this process. And so there's plenty more information there for people who are interested. But yeah, I can't imagine what people have gone through and what they're dealing with. And but one of the things that I think that you're saying about Victim First, which Victims First, I should say, which is why I think it's really worth highlighting, is that this is a way, if people wanted to be able to contribute. This organization was started by people who recognize this problem of nonprofits taking money and benefiting from mass casualty of violence situations, and want to make sure that money that is given to victims, not other organizations, and that people can have confidence that the money is given there will actually go where it's supposed to go. And so, and there is a fund that they have set up for Lewiston. So I think that's a really great opportunity. If anybody does want to help some of the people that are still continuing to struggle, that's a place that they can go to do that. So there's that. Yep.
Can I say one thing about the city council meetings?
Sure, yeah, go for it.
Metrics, but the victim base, the survivors and victims' families who have spoken, each one of them has asked for accountability and acknowledgement. And they're asking their city council to gain that, to get that from the Maine Community Foundation and from the nonprofits that receive the funds. That's what they're asked. That's what they all have asked for. While I appreciate that the city council is looking at the needs of the group, that's not what they're asking for. They're asking for you for this city council to go to the MCF and say, what happened here? To go to the nonprofits and say, what did you do with this money? Because some of those nonprofits get money from the city as well. Like, they have every right to ask them, can you help them? Can you help this victim base? That's what that's what I've heard from the people who have spoken. I've not heard anyone stand up and say, I want you to investigate our needs. Now, they are doing that. And what will happen with that information? The Resiliency Center will look to try and find resources. They cannot stroke a check to people. If someone's having a hard time paying a mortgage, maybe they could get some relief on heating bill or something that would lighten the load of the mortgage, that sort of thing. But the Resiliency Center doesn't have funds that they can just, write a check to someone who's struggling to make ends meet now.
Yeah, no. So the victims want accountability first and foremost. Yes, they have financial needs, and there are other ways to support them. Victim First can help, but it's not about it's not just about that. It's about the accountability is what they're asking for. But you don't know. I heard that the AG Aaron Fry says that the Maine Community Foundation acted perfectly responsibly, so there's no need.
Mm-hmm. That's what he said, and he also has a document that has lies about me on it.
Yeah.
And I was never, I have document to prove it's wrong. It's a lie, but I can't. Yeah. There were
the amount of
sent from the MCF to the AG's office and then sent to the city of Lewiston that had a victim's family member's personal identifying information on it, was not redacted. And I can't tell you. I can't tell you what I've had to do to try and get that changed. I mean, I talked to the administrator at City of Lewiston for 40 minutes saying, I thought it would be a simple, of course, let me redact that. He told me it would be illegal to redact that people could receive that information. It took me 3 solid days to finally get the Attorney General's office to send a redacted copy of that document to the city. And I still don't know exactly where that document went. It went to the city council. One city council member sent it out, sent it to his own Gmail address, sent it to his own Gmail. Another city councilor sent it to a person he was having an argument with by email. A document with a victim's family member's personal identifying information, email, phone number. I've been asking. I did a FOA request to the AG's office, and I was told by that person I'm going to be away for a couple of weeks. I'll get to it when I get back. It's been 3 weeks now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it would be nice. This is a political part. It would be nice if the politicians could set aside their politics and their whether we're Democrat or Republican, and decide that we're going to take this thing that it's really about supporting and taking care of victims. The Democrats acted a lot like they really cared about what happened when they tried to use it in order to increase gun control. But in terms of actually addressing things related to the victims, they're not. They won't want to talk about it outside of just backing the Maine Community Foundation, and it's just playing silly politics because of the fact that maybe they have some ownership and responsibility, or they don't tend to, when it comes to our state government, accountability is not a word that is one that we would use, right? So obviously they're guilty of so much fraud and corruption that they continue to not want to acknowledge anyway. That I think, obviously they're not going to acknowledge this and give it time. But I think also there's political positioning in the fact that this is a story that was largely broke by the Maine Wire, which they want to make sure that the Maine Wire doesn't get anything, any credit for any of the work that they do, because the Maine Wire is appropriately reporting on their malfeasance, and so they're going to do everything they can to bury anything that is presented by the Maine Wire, which is absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, this is the world in which we live. This is our government. We need to get. This is one of the reasons to get out there, vote Republican or not Democrat or whatever that looks like. That's my perspective. We need to get people into political office who are going to be accountable, not because it's a political thing, but because again, it's so ridiculous what's going on. I can't even, my words are failing me. But this is not about politics. This is about people But that's where, like, at this point, it doesn't seem like we're getting a concern for people out of the Democrats in Augusta, and that's why I'm making my comments about politics. So anyway,
and I'm accused of it being political. I'm like, give me a Democrat that will listen to me. Give me a mainstream media outlet that will really tell the story. Please.
Yeah, if there's a Democrat that wants to talk about this and talk about what should happen and actually deal with it, I will give them plenty of time on this podcast and let them talk about how they think it needs to be addressed. I don't care. It's not like I'll easily interview and talk to people from the other side if they're actually serious about actually presenting their views. I'll let them come on if they want to present their views and have an honest conversation, and I'll talk about my perspective. But I'll also specifically around these issues, an issue like this, I'd be happy to have them come on and discuss it. So, but I don't know. So far, I've tried to get I've had all the Republican gubernatorial candidates, and as well as the independent gubernatorial candidate, Rick Bennett, on, and I've invited all of the Democrats on, but none of them have responded. But that invitation is still there, because the purpose of this podcast is informing the people. I am a conservative and will present conservative views and values, but I'm trying to inform the people and let people know who the people are that they might potentially be voting for when it comes to that type of a thing. So, so yeah. Anyway, politics aside, this needs to be corrected, and it can be corrected. Sorry that you guys have had to go through this. You mentioned, and I took some training years ago from a nonprofit that was training people for like rape crisis counseling, kind of not counseling per se, but like a phone service that I was going to be one of the on-call people. And so when going through that, one of the things they talked about, unfortunately, is when one of the first things that you have to do, and if you get somebody who calls who has been raped, you encourage them to go to the hospital and have whatever test needs to be done to be able to gather what DNA or whatever evidence. And it's like, it's really difficult because you're basically asking them to essentially be re-victimized, right? And that's essentially what's happened to you guys. Like you've both experienced either direct loss or been the person who is there and had to experience that and is still dealing with that destiny. And unfortunately, because of the fact that you've been failed by the other people that are involved, you're having to basically continue to relive this type of stuff and talk about this stuff. And I'm sorry that you guys have to do that, but I thank you for having the courage to continue to stand up and say, we want accountability because we need it. So
Thank you. I appreciate you doing this, and thank you, Destiny, too.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate you doing this too.
Yeah. And Destiny, before I think we're probably at the point of like wrapping up, but do you have anything else that you want to share that you think is relevant and important for people to know?
I just feel like, obviously, like with the city council, I don't know if they really care. I think, like Amy said, we need to go up to Augusta and, make our voices heard. I don't know as far as the city council, what they're going to do. They've partnered with the Maine Resiliency Center and the Community Foundation. So I don't know what's left over there, but I think we need accountability, and we need to, I think Augusta's next, right, Amy?
Yeah, that's the hope.
Yeah.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
I've asked the city council to speak for their constituents.
Right.
And I asked them a year ago, and they've been asked since then. So, yeah. And I think it's important to note, like, for most people, while you remember the shooting, you moved on. And for the victim base, there's no moving on.
Right.
Yeah.
For the families.
Yep.
No moving on. And I didn't endeavor to be like a spokesperson for anybody else, but I will tell you that I think I've spoken to about 65 people from the shooting, and no one has said to me, stop what you're doing. And so keep trying. Yeah.
Well, it's like I said, it can't be easy, especially since now you've become the target of people of like the Maine Community Foundation, where it sounds like they're spreading information about you that's not true in order to try to discredit you. according to what you said. I have not verified any, but like, yeah, it's like it's hard to speak out, and you put a target on your back, and so I appreciate you guys continuing to try and seek for justice for the victims and the victims' families. So thank you, and yeah, thanks for taking the time, and and thank everybody for watching. I think we're going to do a special episode in a little bit related to, for anybody who's interested in the future, related to the gubernatorial debate that happened last week. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, thank you guys for coming on. Yeah, we'll see everybody back here the next time. And again, thank you guys so much. And we'll hopefully continue the conversation. And Destiny, I know you're into politics now. You ran for school board, so next time you run, we'll have to have you come back on to talk about, or whatever you run for, to talk about that.
Okay.
If that works.
Thank you.
For you. All right.
I appreciate
you're
that.
welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. All right.
Thank you.
We'll see you all.
Have a good day.